You all know how much I love my island. This land of mine has landscapes that can transport us to Vietnam or Thailand. If I go to another part of the island, it feels like I'm in a Canadian forest. Remind me of the postcards that some immigrant relatives used to send us when I was a kid. Other times, it resembles the Grand Canyon in the United States. This land of mine is a land of contrasts, but if we throw everything into a mixer, stir it well, and add a pinch of love, we have my Madeira island. It's no coincidence that people call this little piece of land, planted in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, the Pearl of the Atlantic. This land truly has a special energy. Sometimes I travel away from it on holidays. When I return, the moment the plane is approaching the runway to land, looking at Mexico, Canisal, and the surrounding mountains, the first thing I feel is I'm coming home. Only those who live here can understand what I'm saying. But for those who lived here in the past, when I say past, I mean for the mid-20th century and earlier than that, they must have gone through hell, as we say here in Portugal. There was a lot of immigration back then, a lot of poverty and misery. Living here must not have been easy at all. I became aware of this when I learned the story of Antonio Justino, which I shared in the first episode of this podcast. Those were very hard times. Once again, I'm going to repeat myself by saying that nothing happens by accident. And why do I say this? Well, last Monday, at the end of the day, I was watching a news program that I have loved for a long time, 60 Minutes. It's a program that is essentially a storyteller, and what fantastic stories it has. In that episode, they talk about medical scientists, a neurosurgeon who, through a non-invasive technique, cure, or rather stop, the progression of Parkinson's disease. All this through the use of high-frequency ultrasounds that straighten the person. Also in that episode, they talk about a case where the doctor managed to cure a drug-addict person become cured. They even spoke with this person, asking if he had relapsed or if he was truly clean. I was simply amazed at the point that science has reached. Since I'm a dreamer, I immediately began to imagine scenarios where we could use this to cure many of the world's problems. This could revolutionize the world, the way we can live our daily lives. We could banish the problems of drugs, alcohol, and all the existing addictions from the face of the earth. Wouldn't that be fantastic? Now you ask, what does this have to do with the island of Madeira? And I tell you, everything. You will understand in a few minutes. This is the David and Goliath podcast, and I will tell you real stories from normal people who had great mighty wars and defeated their giants. Until recently, I used to be a volunteer here in Funchal. I would pick up leftover food from a hotel's dinner, then we could pack it in trays and give it to people who were struggling. Prostitutes, homeless individuals, and often drug addicts. Sometimes they would come to me and start talking. I would stay silent and listen to them. Incredible stories, unimaginable things that supposedly only happen in movies. These were stories of sexual abuse committed by parents, step-parents, teachers, caregivers, coaches, you name it, when they were children. Other stories involve physical abuse, pure and hard beatings. Sometimes I felt like asking, how do you endure this? How are you still alive? a terror that I can never fully imagine, the pain caused by these horrors. And regardless of the story, drugs or alcohol, or both, were they a way to stop feeling the pain in their chests, to stay alive? Otherwise, they would most likely end up dead on some street here in Funchal. It's no wonder that the most of these people never recover from these terrible traumas and have a normal life. As I said, one of the people who received this innovative but still experimental treatment was a drug addict. I don't know exactly what story motivated him to use these substances, but it was probably something similar to the ones I've just shared. He had been using drugs since he was 70 years old. He was considered a terminal case. That is, if continue living this way, death would soon knocking at his door. The patient was placed on a stretcher and then directly into a tube, let's put it in that way, where these high-frequency beams were targeted at his brain, and the doctors hoped that the anxiety to use drugs would disappear or decrease. But to ensure nothing went wrong, the doctors had to know the exact spot in the brain to target these beams. At the start of the treatment, they began by showing the patient images of people injecting themselves or needles with drugs. Almost instantly, they saw one of these legs start to move. The patient was already anxious. On the other hand, the doctors located the exact spot and commanded to send the beams. They seemed like generals or high-ranking army officers giving the orders to fire. Throughout the procedures, the images of drugs and people injecting themselves were never removed from the patient's view. I don't know how long the treatment lasted, but after a few minutes, the nervous movement of the patient's legs stopped. The craving to use had disappeared. After this intervention, the person returned to where he lived, a place, according to him, where drugs were everywhere, but he never felt the urge to use again. He told the 60 Minutes reporter that one day, one of his friends was shaking too much and couldn't inject himself. He asked for his help. He agreed and went to give a hand. He was never very nervous about doing it because he feared being tempted to use again. But no, cured. He felt no desire to use. The man was really cured. And since the surgery, he has never used any substance again for our part of his past. He could have a normal life. Isn't that amazing? Will this be used for all the Goliaths out there? Imagine a person who is afraid of public speaking, afraid of presenting a project at work to their boss and colleagues. I know many people like that. They start sweating, trembling with fear, anxious that something might go wrong, fear of forgetting everything they have to say at the moment of the presentation. When they begin to do the presentation, they start to shake. The audience eyes glued to them make them tremble even more. Their voice becomes shaky. No decent sound comes out. Some of them can't even get their voice to come out. Imagine if they were put in that tube. High-frequency ultrasound beams were aimed at the area of the brain where the anxiety is produced, and bam, it's gone. No more anxiety. Now you can speak on a stage to 5 or 1,000 people. It doesn't matter. Or in a stadium to 50,000 people. It's all the same to you. Nothing can disturb them. Wouldn't that be fantastic too? And what about people who are afraid of flying? Wouldn't this be a great solution? No more panic attacks or running to the bathroom to try and smoke a cigarette in a secret to calm their nerves. I mean, These days that would be impossible because the captain will immediately know through some alarm going off in the cockpit. But back to the challenges. Would be a good solution? Maybe. I don't know the answer to this question. Anything that comes up in our life, any obstacle, operation, done. We can move on to the next problem. No more need for sling or courage to solve or face the challenges. So the question is, or the questions are, would we evolve faster as an individual, and as a society, or not? Could we discover after this operation other barriers or other hidden talents? Would we be stronger people, more resilient, more courageous? As I answered before, I don't know the answer to these questions. Remember, I mentioned earlier about people who were born here in old days on the island, how hard it was to live here. If you want to know more in detail, you can always listen to the second episode of this podcast. But where I'm getting at, you might think right now. I like to use the following analogy. These Goliaths are like stones in our pockets. They bother us at first, but over the time we get used to their weight. The problem is that as we keep walking, we pick up more stones and put them in our pockets until they are full. Then the stones start to fall out, and before we know it, we can't move because the weight of the stones is so great that it prevents us from moving. I speak from my experience. I had to take all those stones and use them to pave my path. Yesterday, I was talking to a cousin and told him that leaving Madeira at 18 to study in Porto, facing all the sadness and difficulties life threw my way, turned a boy into a man. You can be sure I became a better man being. You can be sure I became a better human being than I used to be. Now imagine me being born here in 1945, in the countryside, where everything was extremely poverty. To have something to eat, I often have to barter for something I had. To get to my job, I would have to walk across mountains and valleys, almost 50 kilometers or more. Adding to this, when I was 14 or 15 years old, there was a high chance I wouldn't have an education and might even be sent to war. At that time, many immigrants went to United States, Venezuela, South Africa, and other European countries. Many immigrated at 14 or younger, alone, to start a new life far from the island. Can you imagine your 14-year-old children immigrant alone to another country right now? Not even surgery could have solved these problems here on the island, much less the anxiety or fear of going alone to a new world. On the other hand, many of them sought refuge in alcohol because back then, and even today, men don't cry. But that's a topic for another episode. Until this procedure is available, we will have to face our Goliath, and that there's no other way. We'll have to face our fears and anxieties. There's no other solution. I've mentioned some of my heroes in my podcast. Ayrton Senna, Kobe Bryant, and so on. They all went through hardships. Ayrton went to England in the early 80s of the past century and faced difficulties because he was a Brazilian. Kobe was accused of sexual assault by a woman. All of them, all of us go through hardships in our lives. Why? I don't know. But I know that every time we go through them, we become a new version of ourselves. I like public speaking. It's one of my passions. When I started, I made tons of mistakes. I said many hums, made lots of grammatical errors. My stage posture was anything but correct. I had no vocal variety and sometimes lacked projection. In other words, I wasn't loud enough. That was 2 years ago. What did I do to improve? Well, the first thing was not to give up. Then I started watching speeches on YouTube by renowned speakers, observing how they did it. I used these notes when I went on stage. And after 2 years, my oratory skills have become fantastic. I mean, I'm not the best in the world for sure, but I feel so at ease that everything flows when I'm speaking. Have you listened to the episode My Story? There you can hear my story. If it weren't for my story, my journal, my battles, I would never have created this podcast or become a better person. Could surgery help? Of course. Just the simple fact of getting rid of the anxiety at that time would have been a great achievement. But would I have discovered what was behind the anxiety? Would I have discovered what I didn't like about myself and all the other imperfections I had inside? Maybe yes, maybe no. Who knows? I don't want to, nor am I dismissing surgery because it apparently saved lives. But now I ask, did that person who was addicted to drugs completely solve their problem? The real reason they used drugs? I don't know. Maybe yes, maybe no. As I mentioned before, while surgery isn't available for everyone, we will have to face our Goliath. We will have to be strong, courageous, resilient. We will cry a lot. We will question a lot. Some people won't be able to take it. Others might say, that's life, and resign themselves to the fact that there is no other way. The advice I can give you is, don't give up. No, it's not easy. Would say it would be easy? Has all this sacrifice been worth it? This fight with my Goliath? It has. Very much, I can say so. Those people I mentioned, who were born in 1940s and immigrate to escape war and seek a better life, ask them if it was worth it. Most of them will likely say yes, that it was worth it, that they would do it all over again, the same way. And yes, I would say the same. Stones, we'll find many on our path. The difference lies in what you do with them. I will keep picking them up and building my castle, my Taj Mahal. Just to end on a small note, don't forget that nothing happens by accident.